Welcome back everyone to the Visvim Pioneer channel. It's been a while since we've done one of these videos, but I think it's about time that, we get a little bit caught up on some of my recent pickups as well as my recent trip to Japan. Now, while that trip was mostly, a family thing, I did have a little bit of time to do some shopping at some of the Visvim stores amongst other shops, and so I think today we take, a look at some of these different items. And for the latest pickups, I did pick up recently some footwear items, a couple tops, and an accessory. So before my trip to Japan, Visvim had announced that they were going to be doing a spot slash capsule collection of different items, mostly involving bags and Christos, and that was the all-tote collection. So before I left to my trip, I thought, this would be a perfect time to pick up, a little bit more sandals. So I did happen to pick up two more pairs of Christos, and I'll start by showing this yellow pair. A few different people have asked me about some of the differences between the yellow and the mustard, and the best way I can describe it without seeing the shoes in person is that the mustard pair looks a little bit more like the previously released sand pair from maybe 2 or 3 years ago, whereas this yellow pair kind of reminds me of a pair that had been released way earlier on. But it's definitely it's definitely different enough from everything that I currently own to where it made sense to pick up this pair. So with the all totes collection or whatever, you did have a mix of, as I already mentioned, bags and slides. But the colors, the color palette remained primarily, mostly this yellow, a charcoal. There was this light green, a tealish blue that they're calling a green as well. And then a mustard color, I believe. So as I already mentioned, this is the yellow colorway. However, all of the different materials used across these products are pretty much the same as well. They all have this corduroy fabric that is extremely durable, something that Visvim has used previously on some of its backpacks, including the 20 liter, the 22 liter, the rucksacks, and things like that. So the fabric isn't necessarily something that's ultra innovative or anything like that, but it's something that's reliable that the brand has used before, and honestly makes for some of the more comfortable Christos. They've released, and I own a few Christos in different material fabrics and things like that. I have a couple leather pairs, some suede pairs, some of the more the herringbone pairs and things like that. But the corduroy fabric tends to always kind of be my favorite, especially over the nylon. For some reason, I feel like this fabric is the most breathable. It kind of bends the best in my opinion. And also it's a lot easier to clean and maintain. That's, some of the things behind the corduroy stuff. But on top of that, it's just the overall fit and the way it kind of hugs my foot is just, I don't know, it's different. For those of you that own Christos, you'll know what I'm talking about when I refer to fit. The fabric can have a drastic change on how they fit and feel. And so whenever, this type of material is available, I tend to want to, pick up a pair of these. So beyond, the obvious material choice and the color, not too much is different from your standard Christo. You still have the strap system that these are known for. You still have the Kion leather tag there. I'm kind of, interested on seeing what the next iteration on that is going to be. I know that in the past, people have been able to use this as an identifier for seasons, and so it'd be kind of cool to switch that up at this point. I think that, there's been enough releases with that on it. The insole and the, I guess you could call it an insole, the footbed, whatever you want to call it. So that part and the interior of the Christo is composed of a leather material. It is vegetable tanned. You have the EVA Phylon outsole with the custom, Vibram outsole for Visvim, which, is always a cool thing to have, as previously mentioned. But besides that, it's your standard Christo. The prices for Visvim have been going up significantly, I think, lately. And so these were a little bit more expensive than what they might have been a couple years ago, but that seems to be the case for just about everything nowadays. Moving on to the second pair of Christos that I picked up, I did get the all totes release in this charcoal colorway. I do have a black pair that I had previously shown on the channel, and that one is definitely starting to show its age. Those are airport shoes. They're, going to the grocery store and running errands, and so when you get that kind of careless use out of an item, eventually they start to break down. So It was about time I replaced them with something, on the darker, color spectrum. And I felt like this was definitely a good way to, not just replace them, but, the shade is different enough to where it kind of makes sense. Is that me trying to justify the purchase? Maybe, but, nonetheless, like the Christo is one of those classic Visvim silhouettes that I personally can't get enough of. I do know that this coming weekend, and I'm not sure if I'll be done editing this video before they release, but there is a couple of ICT pairs, both a brown and a navy, that I'm really looking forward to checking out. And so I'll probably stop by the store soon enough to, see if one of those is worth picking up. But the Christo, as already mentioned, is one of those classic like silhouettes that I personally can't get enough of, and I think that anyone that owns a pair definitely gets what I'm talking about. They're super comfortable, they're extremely easy to wear. When I was in Japan, and I'll get a little bit into that, I did wear my black pair pretty much for, half of the trip because it's extremely hot out there, and I wanted something that gave ample room for my foot to swell and things like that. The one issue that I did have is that if you don't wear socks, you'll probably develop a blister on your toe with like the fabric here rubbing, but with a thicker pair of socks it's pretty negligible. And my Christos are pretty broken in, so that's just something to consider when it comes to kind of wearing these without socks. But same details as the yellow pair previously shown. You still have that strap system, the Kion leather tag. The footbed as well as the interior is composed of a full grain vegetable tan leather. It is dyed to match the rest of the upper of the shoe. You have the EVA Phylon outsole and midsole. You have the custom Vibram / Visvim branded outsole. And other than that, like nothing really much has changed for this release. But the other colorway that I was considering getting was the darker like teal color, but I didn't think they'd be as wearable. Like it's a very it's not bright, but it's a very out there color, and so I don't think it'd be as easy to blend that into the rest of my wardrobe. I didn't necessarily go crazy on the pickups, but I definitely made some time and some room to visit some of the different shops that I wanted to check out there. And, I was quite surprised with some of the purchases that I decided to make, but nonetheless, I think it's cool to kind of experiment a little bit and kind of go outside your comfort zone. And sticking with footwear, that's what I did when I visited Beams Japan. On my last day, I thought I'd pick up a few souvenirs because there's a few like stationary items that I wanted to get for some friends and some family. And when I saw this pair of footwear, like my wife thought it was super obnoxious and kind of, too out there. But I thought that they were like the perfect representation of like just kind of highlighting this trip. So I purchased this pair of like Beams like Geta sandals, and they might not be for everyone. And for those of you, that, and I mean, you guys all know, for the most part, I'm pretty sure you guys know what Geta sandals are, but essentially it's traditional Japanese footwear, mostly meant to be worn with like kimonos and things like that. And obviously I'm not going to dive into the full history, but this is kind of like a modern take on what that kind of a sandal would look like. Visvim has released a few different pairs, of Geta sandals in the past, but with this pair, Beams decided to use this like cotton fabric that's super comfortable. Some people have complained online about like blisters being caused through like, the little strap here, which, I've kind of felt a little bit. You do have this like naturally carved wood that you would think isn't comfortable at all, and it's not really that comfortable, but it's kind of cool like for a flip-flop. The thing that really stood out to me though was the fact that they were using like a Birkenstock bottom. The bottom's gonna wear out pretty quick. Like I have a few pairs of like Bostons and Arizonas that I've kind of gone through already, but I think that the modern use of these materials and the fact that they're kind of sleeker, and while they still kind of have like a traditional look, they do have like a modern interpretation to where it doesn't feel like cosplay. Like I think that you can get away with wearing these and it's more of like a cool piece of footwear with like, with a clear nod to some traditional Japanese items, but that isn't necessarily like, too over the top. Like I'm not gonna wear a full-on kimono and go like, do all that. But, as a piece of footwear that I could wear like to the beach and things like that, I think it's, I think it's cool. And I know the beach, wood, water, but I don't really care. You know what I mean? Like, it is what it is. But I thought that this was a cool pickup. And honestly, Beams was one of those stores where the yen to USD like currency kind of made sense. And I'll talk a little bit about that when I get into like some of the Visvim discussions, but it was priced, pretty fairly, like less than a pair of Birkenstocks would cost here. And so I thought it'd be a cool way to like kind of like encapsulate the whole trip and to pick up something that, I found to be rather interesting. Wrapping up with like the footwear items, let me get into the recent tops that I've picked up. I'm actually wearing one of them right now, and this was something that I purchased before the trip as well. This is a patio shirt from Wythe. Now, for those of you that know, and again, most of you will know who Wythe is, it's one of those like, Americana, RRL style brands that's, relatively accessible. And I say relative, right? Like the shirts can still be kind of pricey and the jackets can be kind of pricey, but if we're using Visvim as like the benchmark, then everything kind of becomes accessible and affordable at that point. Wythe is known for these like pearl snap shirts that are extremely popular amongst the people that buy from the brand. I personally never really like them too much. Like, I do like the Western look, and I like the use of the yoke and like the pearl snaps and all that. And I've enjoyed the way they look on other people, but this is one of those like classic cases of you don't necessarily have to buy the most popular item from the brand, or not everything that you like online is going to work for you. Like that shirt, while I did like the way it looked on other people, it's more meant to be, it's meant to be worn tucked in, and I don't really like tucking my shirts in, and so the tail of the shirt is too long, and I personally think it drapes a little bit funny, and so it was never for me. And I did have a chance to like try some on at a few different shops, but it just never, like the length of it, I just always felt like it was the drape was too funny for me. But when I saw that they had released this like patio version of this shirt in a very similar fabric, if not even similar, it's the same fabric that they used. It's like this like Tencel, super breathable, especially for the summer. I decided to pick it up. And it's kind of like boxy, cropped. It doesn't have that length issue that the pearl snap shirt has. Also, the buttons are these like, little custom, like little white buttons. I forget what the technical term is for them, but they're cool. And overall, I just, I wanted to buy something that I could kind of wear as like a throw it on everywhere, kind of do anything shirt without necessarily, worrying about it. And you guys have been following the channel for a while. You know that I don't treat my clothes too preciously. Like, I don't try to baby them. But sometimes when you're wearing like a certain naturally dyed item or an item that could only be dry cleaned, you always kind of have that in the back of your mind, even when you try like not to really care. And so I wanted something that, I can get wet, I can get sweaty in. That's a weird choice of words, but you guys know what I mean. It's just a throw on everyday type of like, don't give a fuck what happens to it kind of shirt that still, has some good quality, still kind of fits into the aesthetic of everything it is that, we typically, wear with these kinds of brands. And so I'm honestly so happy with the fit and like the feel of this shirt. I bought it in white as well. I won't be showing that one because it's like super wrinkled, but essentially it's the same as this. There's like, these Western details on it, and it's a really cool and comfortable shirt. But now, moving on with the shirt that I picked up in Japan, and this is going to kind of lead into a bigger discussion. I ended up picking up a Kapital shirt and, some Kapital souvenirs, like some hats and some bandanas, for gifts for friends and for family. And honestly, the service at Kapital was pretty astonishing. Like, they were extremely helpful. Like, everyone was super talkative and would like ask me tons of questions, like where I was from and like if I needed to check out a size. And the staff at Kapital, at least I felt in my experience at the few different stores that I visited, the staff was just always super helpful. This was my first time going to Japan. I hadn't been before. And so I booked a trip for the summer here in July. And I had received, and I read online, like, stay away from Japan. It's super hot, it's super humid, and it is really hot and it is really humid. But with kids and them being on summer break, summer's like the only option I have to go. Like, if I want to make anything meaningful happen, like, or stay for an extended period of time, it would have to be during the summer. And so my clothing here in LA is kind of meant for, you know, it gets hot, but not really. It can get hot, but not to the extent that it was there. And so I wasn't really prepared. And when I stopped by the Kapital store, and as I already mentioned, like, you know, their level of service and all this type of stuff, I saw a shirt that, like, you know what, that's probably way better for this climate than, you know, what I brought. And so I decided to pick it up. And it's this like camp collar, short sleeve, seersucker shirt. That's such a weird choice of words again, but you guys know what I'm describing, the fabric. So it probably looks hella wrinkled on camera, and that's because it is. Like, seersucker is not necessarily a fabric that you're gonna get like super clean and super polished, but you know, when I was sweating my ass off out there, I really didn't care about whether my shirt was wrinkled or not. I just wanted something that was a little bit more breathable, and this definitely served that purpose. What's cool about this shirt is that, and I've owned a few Kapital pieces in the past, and some of you have asked me about it, like why I don't show them and things like that. And it's because I've sold, you know, most of my Kapital items. Like, I still have some of the stuff, like, as you guys can see, like the bandanas and things like that. But for the most part, the best way I can describe it, which is the way Kapital's been described online so many times, is that it's like, take Visvim, you know, bring it down to a double RL price, and, you know, give it acid, and you pretty much have Kapital. Which is why I sold some of the more like gaudy pieces I had. Like, I had the skeleton pieces with like the cardigan or whatever, I had the shirts, a few of the different bandana sweatshirts and things like that. And I always like was gravitating towards my Visvim pieces more because they were more low key and like just easier to wear. They felt a little bit less streetwear. And so I kind of like stopped buying Kapital for a while. But this was one of those shirts where it's like, it was a combination of the customer service and the fact that there's very minimal branding on here. Like, really the only thing you have is this patch on the side of the pocket. And unless you were really looking at it, you wouldn't even notice it's there. This shirt is like, it has that camp collar, so it's like breathable. You kind of get some air in through the front. You have these like pearl snap buttons. You do have this like Western style motif where you do have these like extended yokes on the shoulder and like the pockets. And this is actually their size 3. So there's only 2 sizes in this shirt. There's a size 1 and a size 3. So if you're like, you know, on the smaller side, you should buy the 1. If you're on the bigger side like myself, you'll buy the 3. But, you know, Kapital is one of those brands that makes sense to buy in Japan. Like, it's so much cheaper. Like, you don't get the same markup that you do here in the US, while also, you know, the currency exchange rate just makes too much sense. I got this shirt, I tried it on in the store, it was super comfortable. It's kind of got this like boxy cropped fit. It was extremely oversized, roomy, airy, and so it was the perfect item, especially for the Japanese heat. And it wasn't necessarily something, much like the Geta sandals, that I was expecting to buy when I was there. And so, you know, the fact that it's like 80% cotton and 20% linen just adds to like the overall usability in the summer. And it's one of those items that I didn't think I'd go in to buy, but it made too much sense to pass up on. And while it might not be for everyone, I definitely think it blends into like the Visvim ethos like as well. And it kind of reminded me of the pattern that I have on that Pioneer shirt that I'm a really big fan of. The level of customer service at Kapital was a lot. They were like, the staff was a lot friendlier and it was a little bit more enjoyable. I did have a chance to stop by a few different Visvim stores. I stopped by the 2 in Shibuya. I stopped by FIL Ginza. I also stopped by the Kyoto store, and I stopped by the Visvim General store. And I'll talk a little bit about my experience at each one. After visiting maybe my 2nd or 3rd store, I came to the realization that I am extremely lucky to have Visvim Exposition so close to me. Obviously, the audience for Visvim is mostly in Japan and in Asian countries, so a lot of the stuff is pretty much sold out. Like, none of the items that I personally was like really looking forward to get were there, or they didn't have my size. Like, they tend to send the bigger sizes here to the US, or they sell out extremely fast. And essentially there really wasn't much that I liked, but on top of that, the stores felt a little bit more, I want to say they felt like kind of stuffy over there. And I'm not sure if it's because there was like a language barrier and things like that, but it definitely wasn't as welcoming and as inviting as, as like Kapital there, or as Visvim Exposition and Carmel here. So and again, that could be due to a multitude of factors. Like I know that the reseller thing is a big issue out there, and so just they probably, you probably have to be at a certain level to like, have like a nicer experience. But that was just overall my experience. The first store I stopped by was FIL Ginza because it was one of their newer stores. I didn't have enough time to make it a Kobe or whatever, but that's something that I'll probably have to plan out for in the future. But the store that I decided to stop by first was the Ginza store because I was staying nearby. And so when I went to the space, it was, and granted, I'll try to insert whatever footage I have, but just keep in mind, guys, that most of these stores don't really let you record in them. And so whenever I could sneak in a shot, I would, but if I wasn't able to and just got an exterior shot, then I'll be showing that here. But the stores were a lot smaller than I thought they would be. Like FIL Ginza seemed like, pretty grand and all that, but everything is just kind of small, and there wasn't necessarily too much product out. Like they did have the all tote stuff, but before I visited, I picked up the Christos that I wanted, and I was thinking about picking up the Charlie bag, and it was something that I was kind of contemplating on whether or not I'd need more, another bag to like potentially bring some souvenirs back and things like that. But it was something that I was sleeping on, and for pricing, like, it was less in Japan, but it wasn't anything like where it was like crazy. Like it might have been like at this point 20 to 30% cheaper. And the fact that they didn't really have anything that I wanted or didn't already own, I kind of was like, I don't want to say I was left disappointed, but I was kind of disappointed. Like, I don't know if you guys can tell or if it's coming off that way, but I was definitely kind of disappointed. Like, yeah, the store was cool, but, the service wasn't necessarily, it was kind of cold, you know what I mean? Like, it was very, like, and they kind of follow you around the store, and it didn't necessarily feel like the most welcoming. But the store was beautiful, right? It was small, but it was beautiful. And, I kind of left Ginza with one of those, hopefully, this is the only store that's like that. So a few days later, I go down to the Shibuya side of town, and I stop by their store on the main street. That store was a lot more welcoming. Definitely the guys there were a little bit more talkative and asked a few more questions. I love the pair of engineer boots that they had there, the 2 boots. Unfortunately, they did not have my size, as is going to be a common occurrence throughout this video. As I already mentioned, they tend to save the bigger sizes for the US or for VIP clients that tend to pick those items up. And so, they didn't really have anything at this store either. Again, this was one of the more recently remodeled stores, so it was aesthetically pleasing to look at. I ended up just getting something from the Little Cloud Coffee section and, just calling it a day with that. But I walked a few blocks to go to the other store, the FIL location, and the associate at that store, he was a lot more talkative, but he was the one that explained to me, and I don't know why I didn't remember this specific detail, but the staff here at Exposition had already mentioned, in Japan, the different stores carry different products, and they're a lot more, they're a lot more segregated when it comes to ICT, contrary department, and things like that. So this was the staff member that reminded me, if you want anything ICT, you're going to have to go to the Visvim General Store. But I wasn't really staying near that side of town, and so I already had so many different, itinerary items planned, because, again, this was a family trip, not a shopping trip for me. So I kind of left the general store for my very last day, or my very last full day of being there. So, I talked to him a little bit about it. We talked about the buying experience in LA, and he was really cool. But again, I left the store, kind of disappointed. I hadn't really picked anything up, and was kind of disappointed in just the overall experience. A couple days later, I went to Kyoto, and in the middle of some of our family shopping and souvenir shopping, I remembered that they have a Visvim store out here. I'm pretty sure they have one. So then when I checked, they do. It's at the FIL Kyoto store, and the street that it was on was a little bit weird. It was super touristy and extremely busy. This was probably my least favorite store, For one, it's really, really small. There's hardly any product in there. Two, the staff that was there, and it was just one person, but super like just off, like very like, I don't know if it was like a like let me give you your space, hands off, but it didn't really feel like that. Like you can kind of tell when like a retail associate's kind of being hands off and is like letting you like kind of like do your thing, and it's like, hey, like I'm here if you need me. But this was more of like just straight up just turned off, and it wasn't, you know, it just wasn't like inspiring. That store was definitely, to me, probably the weakest of the bunch. And at that point I was kind of like, all right, like Visvim's not really like, I don't really have as much enjoyment for the brand out here as I do at home. And it could be that I'm a VIP here in the States, or maybe the fact that there isn't that language barrier. But regardless of like of all that, like my experiences at like Kapital like were so much nicer, you know what I mean? And so as much as I tried like, you know, kind of justifying like the experience, it wasn't, at the end of the day I was kind of like, I was left with like a sour taste in my mouth, essentially. Again, weird choice of words, but you guys know what I mean. And so at that point I thought like, damn, like I'm not gonna have any Visvim related items to bring back for the channel. To kind of show you guys. But, you know, I kind of had accepted that. Like, you know, if I wasn't going to buy anything, I wasn't going to buy anything. Like, you know, I wasn't going to buy something just to buy it either. There's a few items, again, from the All Totes collection that they had throughout all the different stores that I was considering. But it wasn't like an absolute necessity to buy stuff. And, you know, I just thought like, you know, I'd highlight my trip, show you guys some like BTS footage, and just kind of. So my camera died in the middle of telling that story, but, you know, it's probably for the better for a few different reasons. One, I was starting to have a wardrobe malfunction. I was sweating through that previous shirt, and this also gives me an opportunity to show you guys what the Kapital shirt looks like on body, so take it as a 2-for-1. But back to where we were at, and I'll try to fix this in the editing. I really didn't want to have to edit this video too much, but we'll nonetheless we'll figure it out. So as I mentioned previously, you know, the difference between the level of customer service at the, you know, Kapital stores versus like that of Visvim stores was kind of weird to see like the drastic like contrast between both stores. And granted, Visvim is more of a designer slash, you know, like a higher end brand. Kapital, like when you remove the US markup, it's really honestly for the most part relatively affordable. Like, you know, and again with Visvim is like the scale of like on the higher end, pretty much everything's going to be affordable, but the pricing for Kapital is definitely a lot more reasonable. And so I was, you know, having a, you know, kind of a letdown with some of the different stores that I visited. The employee at the store in Shibuya, he had mentioned that I should stop by the general store because they have much more product selection and things like that. So, you know, on my second to last day, I decided to go to the Visvim general store, and my experience at that store almost, you know, did a complete 180 on, you know, what I was, you know, experiencing with Visvim. So by far, that was the most cohesive store in my opinion. Like, it had all the different product lines, it had the women's line, it had ICT stuff, and it even had a little cloud coffee bar. And it just felt like the most complete, you know, and welcoming store. The staff there was super cool. I asked a bunch of questions. As I had mentioned, I was on the fence about whether or not I should be purchasing some of the other items from the All Totes collection. I decided to pull the trigger. So I did leave Japan with one Visvim item, and that is the Charlie shoulder bag in this charcoal colorway, and this is the large size. So when I was talking to the sales associate there, I did want to get the medium, just because with like the UT satchel and with some of the other bags that I have, I kind of already have larger products from the brand, but I wanted something that was a little bit smaller, a little bit more wearable. But I was told that the medium was sold out in this charcoal colorway. And while I like the yellow for the shoes and the teal for the Christos, I didn't necessarily want this big like bag in those colorways, and so I knew that I was going to leave with a charcoal, and this was the only size they had. As previously mentioned, it makes sense to buy Kapital in Japan because the price difference is so much without like the U.S. markup on top of like the weak exchange rate for the yen to USD. But this bag was probably, I want to say, around $420-ish after tax, which isn't too bad considering that the retail here in the US is around the mid 500 mark. So when you take into consideration the tax rate of Los Angeles, you end up with like a $600 product. So essentially I got, close to, $180 off, and that's, quite the deal for a product that I was already considering, getting. And the conversation with the staff there, and I really wish I remembered his name, but it slipped my mind. But he was extremely cool. He, walked me through all the different releases. He kind of explained to me the use of fabrics and, all stuff that you really appreciate when you're shopping at a store like Visvim. For reference, it is like the same material used on the Christos, except that on the Christos, it does have a little bit more padding. Obviously, you're going to be wearing them, so it's a little bit, you got to make it a little bit more comfortable, but color's exactly the same, material's exactly the same, and it's just a really cool, nice, like subtle, not black, darker bag that you can use. Other details include the zipper with these like leather pull tabs. You do have Visvim branding on there. You do have the other zipper here for this front compartment. It doesn't necessarily go too deep, again with the weird language, but it's all right. It'll hold your wallet and a few other different items. The interior of the bag is honestly just one large compartment. There is a very small like pocket that you can put some of the more important items in, and the interior seems to be of like almost like a nylon. So it's all man-made materials. There's nothing like ultra crazy about this bag, but it is something that like you could wear on the daily. The piece of it, and it's something so small that I found really like kind of like what drew me towards the bag, was the use of this like metal like adjuster for the strap. It definitely gives it a lot more of a like premium feeling versus some of the plastic components like on the zipper, for example. And you could either wear it as like a shoulder bag, or you could throw it over and wear it as a crossbody. I'll probably be using it as like an extended like travel bag, something simple that you can kind of just throw in a bunch of different items in. But as I mentioned, I was kind of disappointed that I wasn't going to leave with anything. And after talking to the staff there at the general store, picking up like, some drinks and things like that at the Little Cloud Coffee Cafe or whatever, I felt a lot better about the experience with Visvim in Japan after visiting that store. The associate was actually super cool. And, I told him that I had one of these waiting for me when I got home, but he still insisted that I take it. And this is the dissertation like catalog for fall winter 25. It was just the fact that he wanted to go like above and beyond and give me something to like, kind of highlight the trip was something that I thought was really thoughtful and really cool. And it was like, I don't know, his level of customer service, like it was one of those like save the best for last kind of situations. And, I think that the experience at the Visvim General Store definitely improved my overall experience with Visvim in Japan. But again, just to highlight, like they were out of my size and pretty much everything. Some of the sales associates weren't too talkative. Some of the stores felt a little bit stuffy. And, I'm just really blessed and kind of spoiled really to be, to shop at Exposition is honestly what I drew from this. But I guess I can use this catalog as a good segue. So in regards to some of my items from fall winter 2025 from the trunk show order I placed last year, I do have the first item coming in about 2 weeks. I got the Visvim flagship exclusive coverall, and I know that some of you guys aren't going to be a fan of some of the graphics that are on it, but I thought it was a really cool piece with a lot of wearability. And not just that, but it's composed of like a G-cord fabric, which is something that I don't own yet. And so many of you have like told me like, why are you not buying any G-cord stuff? And it's not by lack of trying. I just haven't necessarily, gone into experiment with that fabric yet. And the one item that I did want, which was the 101XX like crash that dropped a few years back, that one has since been sold out. And I tend to avoid buying used garments. I like buying new ones with like my story and stuff like that. So You know, and there's always the risk of like, you know, I get asked so many times by you guys like to legit check something. There's always that risk, and while, you know, I know what to look for, it's always best to play it safe, at least in my opinion, especially when you're spending the kind of money that you're spending. And so with that, I do have, as I mentioned, a couple items from my trunk show order coming in, and I'm really looking forward to showcasing those to you guys. And until next time, hopefully the hiatus between this video and the next video won't be too long. It's just life's been so busy lately, but I'll try to find a way to make more time to record more of these videos consistently. With all that being said, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Really appreciate it if you guys could like, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, thank you for tuning in. Peace.